My son decided I wasn't worthy of his new elite circle. He told me not to come to the company party for the business I helped him build. For the first time, I didn't argue. I just left for the coast. As the sun set, my phone began to vibrate. Dozens of calls from investors, and something terribly wrong had happened. But let me back up. The day had started with such ordinary cruelty. "Mom, about the launch gala on Friday." Marcus's voice had that particular tone, the one he'd developed over the past 2 years, slightly impatient, as if addressing someone who couldn't possibly understand the complexities of his world. "I've already RSVP'd," I replied, adjusting my reading glasses as I reviewed the quarterly projections he'd asked me to look over. Even now, after being gradually edged out of Vertex Technologies operations, he still brought the numbers to me first. Old habits die hard. "The blue dress should be appropriate, don't you think?" I watched his expression tighten across the video call. At 35, my son had grown handsome in a polished corporate way. The slight awkwardness of his youth had been sculpted away by expensive haircuts and tailored suits. Sometimes I barely recognized the boy who once built computers at our kitchen table while I calculated how to stretch my savings to cover both the mortgage and his college application. "That's what I wanted to discuss." He cleared his throat. "We're pivoting the event slightly, making it more exclusive." "Exclusive," I repeated, the word hanging between us. I already knew what was coming. Caroline thinks, we both think, that keeping the guest list focused on key investors and industry influencers would create a better atmosphere for the Secure Vault launch. Caroline thinks. Those 2 words had preceded so many painful changes in my son's life over the past 18 months. "Caroline thinks your apartment is too far from the financial district. Caroline thinks your clothes send the wrong message. Caroline thinks your mannerisms reflect your lack of proper upbringing." Caroline Bennett, with her Ivy League pedigree and family connections, had been reshaping my son since their first date. I'd watched it happen with the helpless ache of a mother who knows intervention will only accelerate rejection. "I see," I said, removing my glasses. "And I'm no longer on that exclusive list." "Mom, please don't make this difficult." Marcus ran a hand through his expertly styled hair. "This launch could put Vertex in the Fortune 500. The people attending, they're not like us. They come from different backgrounds. Different from me," I corrected quietly. "Not different from you, apparently." He had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. "You know what I mean. We need to project a certain image. Carolyn's father is bringing the Westfield Group. They could double our valuation overnight." I thought about the $387,000 I'd invested in Vertex Technologies 6 years ago. My entire retirement fund, the insurance money from his father's death, everything I had. I thought about the 18 months I'd worked without salary as Marcus's operations manager, bookkeeper, and sometimes janitor when we couldn't afford cleaning services. "I understand," I said, and I did. I understood perfectly what was happening. My son was ashamed of me. "Look, we'll have dinner next week, just us," he offered, the relief in his voice palpable. "I'll tell you all about the launch. Maybe we can celebrate the new funding round." "Maybe," I replied, gathering the financial documents and placing them in a neat stack. The projections look solid, by the way, though I'd watched the burn rate in Q3. Sophie's being optimistic about the infrastructure costs. "That's why I still bring you the numbers first," he said, attempting lightness. "No one catches details like you do. No one catches details like you do. But please don't attend the defining moment of the company you helped create." "I need to go," I said suddenly. "I have plans this weekend anyway." "You do?" His surprise was genuine, and it stung. In his revised narrative of our lives, I was a simple, devoted mother with no existence beyond supporting his ambitions. "Yes, Marcus. I do occasionally have my own life." I softened my tone, seeing his confusion. "I'm heading to the beach house for a few days. The forecast is perfect." The beach house was a generous description for my modest cottage in Rockport, a small, weathered structure I'd purchased after selling our family home when Marcus moved to his luxury downtown condo. He'd visited once and never returned, finding it too rustic, too isolated, too ordinary. "Oh, well, have a good time. I'll call you after the launch." He hesitated. "Mom, I hope you understand this isn't personal." But it was. It was the most personal rejection possible. "Goodbye, Marcus," I said, ending the call before he could see the tears I refused to shed in his presence. 2 hours later, I was driving north along the coast, my small suitcase in the trunk, the financial documents left untouched on his desk with a simple note. "You should show these to Caroline's father. I'm sure he'll be impressed." It was the first time in 35 years I hadn't fought to remain in my son's life. Through the awkward teenage years, the college rebellions, even the gradual social climbing of his early professional success, I'd always persisted, always found ways to remind him of our connection. But something had shifted in me. Perhaps it was the casual cruelty of his exclusion, or perhaps it was simply exhaustion from watching him become someone I no longer recognized. The beach house welcomed me with its familiar simplicity. Salt-weathered shingles, faded blue shutters, the creaky screen door that announced my arrival to no one but the seagulls. Inside, nothing matched, but everything belonged. The opposite of Marcus's meticulously designed living spaces. I opened all the windows, letting the Atlantic breeze sweep through rooms that had been closed too long. Then I walked the short path to the beach, where I sat on the sand and watched the waves until the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. My phone, which I'd silenced after leaving the city, buzzed persistently in my pocket. I ignored it, focusing instead on the gradual transformation of the sky, deep blue giving way to orange, then pink, then a luminous gold that made the water shimmer. It was Friday evening. The launch gala would be starting soon at the Beacon Hotel downtown. Marcus would be greeting investors in his bespoke suit, Caroline elegantly draped at his side, and I was exactly where I needed to be. Until my phone vibrated again and again and again, with increasing urgency. Finally, I glanced at the screen. 27 missed calls, 15 text messages, all from numbers I recognized immediately. Thomas Weber, Vertex's lead investor, Sophie Chen, the CFO, board members, partners, even reporters. The last text from Sophie made my heart stop. Elaine, emergency. Security breach in Secure Vault. Catastrophic. Marcus, unreachable. Need you, now. As the golden sun finally disappeared beneath the horizon, I realized the party my son had so carefully shielded me from had turned into a nightmare, and despite everything, I was already calculating how quickly I could get back to Boston. I drove back to Boston in the dark, my headlights carving a path through the coastal fog that had rolled in after sunset. The 2-hour journey gave me time to piece together what had happened from the frantic voice messages and texts flooding my phone. Secure Vault, Vertex's revolutionary data security platform, had catastrophically failed during its live demonstration at the launch gala. Not a minor glitch or performance issue, but a fundamental security breach that had exposed sensitive data from the beta clients, including financial institutions and healthcare providers. Elaine, it's Thomas. Call me immediately. Something's gone terribly wrong. Thomas Weber's voice message was uncharacteristically tense. As Vertex's primary investor and a technology veteran himself, Thomas rarely sounded rattled. The fact that he'd called me directly, instead of dealing with Marcus, spoke volumes. "Mrs. Rossi, this is Jennifer from the Wall Street Journal. I'm reaching out for comment on the Vertex Technology security incident. Please call me at..." I deleted that one mid-message. Journalists were already circling. Sophie's messages were the most informative and increasingly desperate. "Elaine, the encryption protocol collapsed during the demo." Marcus tried to continue, but the projections showed actual client data on screen. Complete system failure. Investors walking out. Caroline's father just pulled the Westfield Group commitment. Marcus is not handling it well. Legal team says we're facing potential lawsuits from every beta client. Where are you? Please call. I hadn't called anyone back yet. First, I needed to understand exactly what had gone wrong, and for that, I needed access to the system architecture. I pulled off at a rest stop, opened my laptop, and connected to the secure server I'd maintained since Vertex's early days. Marcus didn't know I still had access. When he'd gradually removed me from official roles in the company, I'd maintained one back door, not out of distrust, but maternal instinct. Some part of me had always feared this day would come. The system logs told a clear story. 3 months ago, the core security protocol had been modified, not by the original development team, but by a new group headed by Caroline's former classmate. They had sacrificed fundamental security measures for enhanced performance metrics and a sleeker user interface, classic form over function, with catastrophic results. I found the relevant code change, documented the vulnerability, and then drafted a preliminary repair strategy. By the time I pulled back onto the highway, I had the beginnings of a crisis management plan formed in my mind. My phone rang again. This time, I answered through the car's speaker system. Elaine, thank God. Thomas Weber's relief was palpable. Where are you? Heading back to the city. I've identified the security breach and have a preliminary fix, but it will require taking the entire platform offline for at least 12 hours. Do it, he said without hesitation. The damage is already severe. Every minute we delay makes it worse. I'll need authorization. Marcus would have to. Marcus is indisposed. Thomas's careful phrasing told me everything I needed to know about my son's mental state. The board has called an emergency meeting in 30 minutes at the office. We need you there. Thomas, I said, choosing my words carefully. I'm not officially affiliated with Vertex anymore. Marcus has made that quite clear. There was a momentary silence on the line. Elaine, let's be candid. Half the investors backed Vertex because of you. Your reputation in cybersecurity was the reason many of us felt confident in a startup run by a relatively inexperienced CEO. His tone softened. We all understood your desire to step back and let Marcus lead. But right now Vertex needs you. Marcus needs you whether he recognizes it or not. The irony wasn't lost on me. After being deliberately excluded from the gala because I didn't project the right image to these very investors, I was now being called in to save those relationships. I'll be there in 45 minutes, I said finally. Have Sophie prepare the system for emergency protocols. Password Artemis 1988. Thomas paused. That's Marcus's birth name and year. Yes, I replied simply. Every critical protocol in the Vertex infrastructure uses variations of that password. Something only I would implement, and only Marcus would recognize. After ending the call, I drove in silence, my thoughts oscillating between technical solutions and maternal concern. Despite everything, my heart ached for Marcus. I knew how much this launch had meant to him, how desperately he'd wanted to prove himself worthy of the elite circle he'd fought so hard to enter. When I arrived at Vertex headquarters, a gleaming glass tower that bore no resemblance to the converted warehouse where we'd started, the situation was even worse than I'd imagined. Security guards were holding back reporters in the lobby. Inside the main office, shell-shocked employees huddled in groups, whispering anxiously as I walked by. Sophie spotted me immediately, rushing over with visible relief. Her elegant evening dress contrasted sharply with her exhausted expression. Thank God you're here, she said, embracing me briefly. It's a complete disaster. The demo exposed actual patient data from Boston Memorial. Their legal team arrived 10 minutes ago. The stock has dropped 38% in after-hours trading, and 3 board members have already resigned. Where's Marcus? I asked, scanning the chaotic scene. Sophie's expression tightened. Conference room C. He's with Caroline and her father. It's not pretty. I nodded, steeling myself. The emergency board meeting? Main boardroom, they're waiting for you. As I turned toward the boardroom, Sophie caught my arm. Elaine, she said quietly, you should know. Caroline's been telling everyone this happened because Marcus trusted your original system architecture instead of upgrading with her recommendation. She's building a narrative that you're to blame. The betrayal stung, but didn't surprise me. The system logs tell a different story. I know, Sophie agreed, her expression grim. I tried to tell Marcus, but he's not in a state to listen to anything right now. Before heading to the board meeting, I made a quick detour past conference room C. Through the glass wall, I could see Marcus slumped in a chair, his perfect suit rumpled, his face buried in his hands. Caroline stood beside him, her posture rigid with fury as she faced her father, whose aristocratic features were contorted with cold anger. Even through the soundproofed glass, their body language told the story. Marcus was being excoriated by the man whose approval he'd coveted, while the woman he'd chosen over his own mother was already distancing herself from his failure. For a moment, maternal instinct nearly overwhelmed me. I wanted to burst into the room, defend my son, tell Edward Bennett exactly what I thought of him and his calculating daughter. Instead, I turned away. Marcus had made his choice. Now I needed to focus on saving the company he'd been so eager to claim as solely his creation. In the boardroom, 8 grim-faced board members and major investors sat around the massive table. Thomas rose as I entered, extending his hand with genuine respect. Elaine, thank you for coming. We need your expertise now more than ever. I nodded, accepting the seat at the head of the table, the seat that should have been my son's. Let's begin, I said, opening my laptop. We have a company to save. The vulnerability stems from a significant architecture change made approximately 3 months ago, I explained, my voice steady as I presented the digital evidence to the board. The original encryption protocol was replaced with a streamlined version that prioritized speed and interface responsiveness over security integrity. I displayed the relevant code sections on the large screen, highlighting the critical differences. Most board members weren't technical enough to understand the specifics, but Thomas and 2 others were nodding grimly, recognizing the magnitude of the error. This change wasn't properly documented or tested, I continued. It bypassed our established security review protocols. If it had been submitted through proper channels, this vulnerability would have been identified immediately. Who authorized this change? Demanded Janet Keller, a venture capitalist who had been with Vertex since the second funding round. How did something this fundamental slip through? I hesitated, but only briefly. The change was implemented by a team led by Alexander Reed and approved directly by Marcus, bypassing the standard security review committee. Reed, Thomas muttered. Caroline's Harvard classmate. Yes, I confirmed. He was hired as UX director 3 months ago. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Marcus had circumvented established security protocols to fast-track changes recommended by his fiancée's friend, changes that had now catastrophically compromised the company's flagship product. What's our exposure? Asked Michael Drayson, representing our largest institutional investor. Legally and financially. Significant, I admitted. At minimum, we've breached confidentiality agreements with all 17 beta clients. The healthcare clients face potential HIPAA violations. The financial institutions may have regulatory reporting requirements. The gravity of the situation settled over the room like a heavy shroud. Vertex Technologies, the company I had helped build from nothing, that Marcus had been so proud to call his creation, was facing an existential crisis. What's the solution? Thomas asked, his eyes fixed on me with complete trust. I took a deep breath. We need to implement an immediate 3-phase strategy. For the next 20 minutes, I outlined my plan. First, an emergency patch to seal the vulnerability. Second, a transparent communication approach with all affected clients. And third, a complete security audit and redesign of the compromised components. This will require taking the entire platform offline for at least 12 hours, I explained. We'll lose revenue and client confidence, but the alternative is continuing to operate a fundamentally compromised system. And who will lead this effort? Janet asked, though her gaze suggested she already knew the answer. I will, I replied simply. With the board's authorization. The vote was unanimous. Within minutes, I was officially reinstated as Vertex's chief security officer with emergency powers to execute the recovery plan. The title I'd held during the company's first 2 years, before Marcus had suggested I step back for his professional development. As the meeting concluded, Thomas remained behind while the others filed out, many already on their phones with damage control calls. He's going to fight this, Thomas said quietly when we were alone. Marcus won't easily accept your return, especially not under these circumstances. I know, I acknowledged, gathering my materials. But he's not thinking clearly right now. Once the immediate crisis is contained, we can address the personal complications. Thomas studied me with the insightful gaze that had made him a legendary investor. You know, Elaine, I've always wondered why you stepped away. Vertex was as much your creation as his. I met his eyes briefly before looking away. He needed to become his own man, Thomas. And has he become his own man? The question hung between us, weighted with all that had transpired. Before I could formulate a response that balanced maternal loyalty with honest assessment, the boardroom door burst open. Marcus stood in the doorway, his once impeccable appearance now disheveled, his eyes wild with a mixture of panic and fury. Behind him, I glimpsed Caroline, her cold gaze fixed on me. What the hell is going on? Marcus demanded, his voice unsteady. Sophie says the board just named Mom as emergency CSO, without consulting me? Thomas straightened, his tone shifting to one of calm authority. Marcus, the board has authorized emergency measures to address the security breach. Your mother has identified the vulnerability and developed a recovery strategy. I'm still the CEO, Marcus shot back. You can't make decisions like this without me. Actually, we can, Thomas replied evenly. Section 7. 3 of the company charter specifically allows the board to implement emergency leadership changes during a crisis that threatens the company's viability. I watched my son's face as this information registered. Another detail he'd overlooked in his rush to claim the mantle of leadership. The company charter I'd helped draft had included that provision specifically to protect Vertex from potential missteps by an inexperienced CEO. "This is a coup," Caroline said, stepping forward. "Orchestrated by her." She pointed at me without using my name, as if I were a stranger. "It's a rescue operation," I corrected calmly. "The breach happened because Alexander Reed's team replaced my security architecture with an inferior version. A version that, coincidentally, you championed to Marcus." Carolyn's eyes narrowed. "Alex is a visionary technologist. The interface improvements were necessary for market acceptance." "Interface improvements don't matter when the core security fails," I replied, keeping my voice level, as demonstrated quite publicly tonight. Marcus looked between us, his expression betraying his internal conflict. "Mom," he finally said, a note of pleading entering his voice, "this is my company." The words stung more than they should have. My company. Not ours, despite my seed investment, my thousands of unpaid hours, my expertise that had shaped every aspect of the original technology. "Yes, Marcus," I said quietly. "It's your company, which is why I'm here, to save it." Thomas intervened before Marcus could respond. "We need to focus on the immediate crisis. Elaine has a recovery plan that requires immediate implementation. The board has authorized it. We can address organizational questions after we've stabilized the platform." Marcus seemed to deflate slightly, the reality of the situation finally penetrating his defensive anger. "What's the plan?" he asked, not looking at me directly. I outlined the 3 phases again, keeping my explanation clinical and focused on technical necessities rather than the human error that had created the crisis. As I spoke, I could see grudging recognition dawning in his eyes, the awareness that my solution was sound. 12 hours offline, he muttered when I finished. "We'll lose millions. We'll lose everything if we don't fix this correctly," I countered. "The platform is fundamentally compromised, Marcus." Caroline placed a proprietary hand on his arm. "Edward has already withdrawn the Westfield investment," she said, her tone suggesting this was somehow my fault rather than the consequence of the security failure. "He says Vertex is too high risk now." The way she said it, distancing herself from the company's troubles, emphasizing her father's judgment, told me everything about her commitment to my son. She had attached herself to his rising star, but had no intention of going down with a sinking ship. Marcus must have heard it too, because he shook off her hand, something hardening in his expression. "I need to make some calls," he said abruptly. "Thomas, you'll update the other board members? Mom?" He hesitated, as if the word felt unfamiliar in this context. "Do what you need to do. We'll talk after the system is secured." Without another word, he turned and walked out, leaving Caroline momentarily stunned before she hurried after him. Thomas and I exchanged glances. "Well," he said dryly, "that went better than expected." "He's in shock," I replied, gathering my laptop. "The real confrontation will come after the crisis is contained, when he has time to process what happened." And what happened, I didn't add, was that my son's carefully constructed new identity, the successful, independent tech CEO worthy of Boston's elite circles, had shattered in a single evening. The question was whether Marcus himself had been lost in the wreckage. "I'll be in the main security operations center," I told Thomas, heading for the door. "We have 12 hours to save this company, and perhaps, though I didn't say it aloud, to save my son from the consequences of his own ambition." The Vertex Security Operations Center had changed significantly since my active involvement with the company. The converted warehouse space where we'd started, with its exposed brick walls and second-hand furniture, had been replaced by a sleek, modern facility filled with curved monitors and programmable LED lighting that currently bathed the room in a tense blue glow. But the fundamentals remained the same. Rows of engineers hunched over keyboards, the quiet intensity of focused problem-solving, the occasional muttered curse when a solution failed. As I walked in, the room fell silent. Dozens of eyes turned toward me, some wide with surprise, others showing unmistakable relief. I recognized most of the senior staff, people I had personally hired during Vertex's early days. The newer faces were unknown to me, likely recruited during Marcus's expansion phase. Mrs. Rossi, Alan Chen, our original head of security operations, approached with visible relief. "Thank God you're here." "Alan," I nodded, setting my laptop on the main console. "Situation report?" He quickly briefed me on their initial response measures. They'd taken the client portal offline, but core systems were still running, attempting to maintain services while preventing further data exposure. It was a reasonable first step, but insufficient. "We need to go dark," I stated firmly. "Complete shutdown of all external interfaces while we implement the security overhaul." A young woman I didn't recognize stepped forward, her expression skeptical. "With all due respect, Mrs. Rossi, a complete shutdown would cost millions in downtime and potentially violate our SLAs with enterprise clients." I met her gaze steadily. "And your name is?" "Megan Reed, Director of Client Services." Her tone suggested this title carried significant weight. "Well, Ms. Reed, I understand your concern for client relations, but at this moment, we're hemorrhaging trust faster than dollars. If we don't address the fundamental security vulnerability, we won't have any SLAs to worry about because we won't have a company." I turned to address the entire room. "The board has authorized emergency protocols. We're implementing a complete system rebuild using the original security architecture as our foundation." Alan's eyebrows rose. "You want to roll back to the original code base? That's at least 3 months of development work we'd lose." "Not all of it," I clarified. "Just the compromised security layer. We'll integrate verified recent features after the foundation is secure." I connected my laptop to the main system and projected my analysis onto the central screen. The vulnerability was introduced exactly 94 days ago when this security protocol was modified. The code comparison displayed clearly for everyone to see. The elegant, robust security architecture I had designed side by side with the streamlined but fundamentally flawed version that had replaced it. Recognition dawned on several faces. Alan let out a low whistle. "That change came from Alexander Reed's team," he said quietly. "It was fast-tracked by executive order, bypassed all our standard security reviews." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Which is why we're now implementing a new protocol. No security-related changes go live without passing through 3 layers of independent review, regardless of who authorizes them." The room was silent as the implications settled. I was essentially creating a system that would prevent even the CEO, my son, from circumventing critical security protocols. "Now," I continued briskly, "I need 3 teams. Team 1 will handle the system shutdown and client communication. Team 2 will implement the security rollback and verification. Team 3 will document every aspect of tonight's breach for our disclosure reports to affected clients. Alan, you'll coordinate between all 3 teams and report directly to me." As people began organizing themselves into the assigned groups, Megan Reed remained standing before me, her expression conflicted. "This plan contradicts what Mr. Rossi instructed earlier," she said, lowering her voice. "He wanted a partial fix that would keep systems online." I met her gaze directly. "The board has granted me emergency authority to address this crisis. If Mr. Rossi has concerns about my approach, he can raise them with me directly." She hesitated, then gave a curt nod before walking away. I made a mental note to watch her. Clearly one of Marcus's loyal hires, possibly reporting back to him. For the next 6 hours, I immersed myself completely in the technical challenge before us. The work was demanding but familiar, like returning to a language I had once been fluent in. Despite years away from daily coding, my fingers found their rhythm on the keyboard, my mind anticipating problems before they arose. Around 3 a.m., as we approached the halfway point of our projected timeline, I stepped away briefly to stretch my legs and find coffee. In the small kitchen area adjacent to the operations center, I found Sophie waiting, still in her evening dress but now with a casual sweater thrown over it. "Thought you might need this," she said, handing me a steaming mug. "Still black, 2 sugars, right?" "You remembered," I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Some things don't change." Sophie leaned against the counter, studying me with tired eyes. "Others change too much." I knew she wasn't talking about coffee preferences. "How is he?" Sophie sighed, oscillating between rage and panic. "Caroline left about an hour ago, said she needed to process things at home. Her father is threatening to make a public statement about withdrawing from the investment round." "Let him," I replied, sipping the coffee. Thomas is already in talks with alternative investors. Edward Bennett's money was more about prestige than necessity. Try telling that to Marcus. He's been obsessed with the Westfield Group connection since he started dating Caroline. Sophie shook her head. I've never seen him like this, Elaine. It's like he's lost sight of what Vertex was supposed to be. The sadness in her voice matched my own internal ache. Sophie had been with Vertex almost from the beginning, one of the first employees we'd been able to afford after securing initial funding. She had watched the company's evolution from scrappy startup to corporate player, and had observed Marcus's gradual transformation alongside it. Success changes people, I said quietly, not always for the better. This isn't just success, Sophie countered. This is social climbing disguised as business strategy. Ever since Caroline entered the picture, everything has been about impressing her father, joining the right clubs, getting featured in the right publications. She hesitated, then added, "He was never like this when you were actively involved. You kept him grounded." I stared into my coffee, unwilling to criticize my son even to Sophie, who had become almost family over the years. He needed to find his own path. And now that path has led straight to disaster, she observed bluntly. What happens after you fix this, Elaine? Will you stay? The company needs you, whether Marcus is ready to admit it or not. It was the question I'd been avoiding since arriving back at Vertex headquarters. I had thrown myself into the technical emergency to postpone confronting the deeper issue, my place in the company's future and in my son's life. Let's focus on the immediate crisis, I replied, finishing my coffee. The rest can wait until morning. Sophie nodded, respecting my deflection. As we headed back to the operations center, she paused at the door. He's in his office, she said quietly. Hasn't left since the board meeting. Might be worth checking on him. I glanced down the hallway toward the CEO suite, Marcus's domain, with its glass walls and expensive art pieces carefully selected by Caroline to project the right image of success. After we complete the security implementation, I said firmly, the company comes first right now. But as I rejoined the technical teams and immersed myself back in code, a part of my mind remained fixed on that office, and the son who sat alone within it, facing the ruins of his carefully constructed facade. Dawn broke over Boston as we entered the final phase of the security recovery. The warm light filtering through the operations center windows found a room transformed from chaotic emergency to focused determination. Engineers worked in coordinated silence, implementing the rebuilt security architecture with methodical precision. Final verification protocols are green across all subsystems, Alan reported, exhaustion evident in his voice but satisfaction in his eyes. We're ready for limited client portal reactivation whenever you give the word. I nodded, reviewing the comprehensive diagnostic reports on my screen. Let's bring up the administrative interfaces first, run a complete transaction log verification, then restore client access in controlled phases. The plan was executed with the disciplined efficiency I'd always insisted upon during Vertex's early days. One by one, system components were reactivated, tested, verified, and cleared. By 7:30 a.m., we had restored basic functionality to all critical infrastructure without any sign of the previous vulnerability. We did it, Alan said quietly, standing beside me as we watched the system health monitors display steady green status indicators across the board. In 12 hours, we completely rebuilt the security architecture and verified integrity across all subsystems. The team performed admirably, I replied, looking around at the exhausted but proud faces. Even Megan Reed had eventually thrown herself fully into the recovery effort, her initial resistance giving way to professional dedication as the night progressed. Everyone should take a break, get some rest. We'll reconvene at noon to begin client briefings and damage control. As the team dispersed, some heading home for a few hours of sleep, others collapsing onto couches in the break room, I remained at the central console, running one final series of verification tests. The security vulnerability had been fully addressed, but the company's reputation had suffered significant damage. The real work, rebuilding trust with clients and investors, was just beginning. Mrs. Rossi. I turned to find Thomas Weber standing behind me, impeccably dressed despite the early hour and lack of sleep. Like many successful venture capitalists, he seemed to operate on a different biological clock than ordinary humans. The system is secure, I reported. We've addressed the vulnerability and implemented additional safeguards to prevent similar issues in the future. He nodded. I never doubted you would. The board has been receiving regular updates throughout the night. They're impressed with the speed and thoroughness of the recovery. The team deserves the credit, I demurred. The team followed your leadership, Thomas countered, just as they did in Vertex's early days. He paused, studying me with the penetrating gaze that had made him a legend in venture capital. The board is meeting at 9 to discuss next steps. They'd like you to attend. I understood what wasn't being said. What about Marcus? He'll be there as well. Thomas's expression revealed nothing. He's been in his office all night. Hasn't spoken to anyone since our earlier meeting. I glanced at my watch, just after 8 a.m. An hour before, I would need to face not only the board, but my son, and the complicated future of our relationship, both personal and professional. I need to clean up and change before the meeting, I said, suddenly aware of my rumpled appearance after the all-night crisis session. I have spare clothes in my old office, if it still exists. It does, Thomas confirmed. Marcus never reassigned it after you stepped back. It's been used for storage, but it's still technically yours. The information surprised me. Despite everything, my son had preserved my space within the company, even as he'd worked to distance himself from my influence. I made my way through the gradually awakening building to the small office I'd occupied during Vertex's first 3 years. As Thomas had said, it was now filled with boxes and unused equipment, but my desk remained, along with the small closet where I'd kept spare clothes for the frequent late nights of a startup founder. After washing up in the adjacent bathroom and changing into a simple black dress I found still hanging in the closet, I took a moment to gather my thoughts. The crisis had been addressed, but the underlying issues remained. My son had systematically pushed me out of the company I'd helped create, only to find himself desperately in need of my expertise when disaster struck. Now, we would both have to navigate the aftermath, professionally and personally. As I stepped into the hallway, I found myself face to face with Marcus. He had clearly not slept. His eyes were red-rimmed, his expensive suit wrinkled, his normally perfect hair disheveled. He looked simultaneously older than his 35 years and strangely young, like the vulnerable boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The empty morning hallway amplified the silence between us. The system is secure, I finally said, defaulting to the professional aspect of our relationship. We've restored core functionality and implemented additional safeguards. He nodded, his expression unreadable. Sophie told me, the board is impressed. Another silence stretched between us, filled with all the unspoken things that had accumulated over years of gradual estrangement. Why didn't you tell me? He asked suddenly, his voice hoarse. About the security architecture changes. About Reed's team bypassing protocols. You must have known. The question caught me off guard. I didn't know, I replied honestly. I've been keeping my distance, Marcus, as you requested. His expression hardened slightly. You've been monitoring our systems, though. You still had access. You arrived last night with a complete diagnostic already prepared. I maintained a backdoor for emergencies, I acknowledged, but I wasn't actively monitoring day-to-day operations or code changes. That would have been intrusive. But if you had been watching, he pressed, a note of accusation entering his voice, this wouldn't have happened. You would have caught the vulnerability before it went live. I studied my son's face, recognizing the deflection for what it was. Are you suggesting this failure is somehow my responsibility, because I respected your wish for independence? He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. No, He stopped, struggling with words. Everything was perfect. The launch, the Westfield investment, Caroline's father finally accepting me into their circle. And now, it's all gone. Not all, I corrected gently. The company is still viable. The technology is sound. We've addressed the security vulnerability. Vertex can recover from this. Caroline left, he said abruptly. Last night, said she needed space to reconsider our future in light of recent developments. His laugh was bitter. Apparently, her father suggested she might want to explore other options. Despite everything, my heart ached for him. Marcus, the board meeting starts in 20 minutes, he interrupted, straightening his posture and visibly reassembling his professional facade. They're going to ask you to stay on permanently as CSO. Thomas already told me. I studied my son, sensing the conflict within him. And how would you feel about that? He met my eyes directly for the first time. Does it matter? The board has made up their mind, just like they made up their mind to exclude me from the recovery operation last night. They didn't exclude you, I corrected. You removed yourself. You could have been in the operations center, working alongside everyone else. Instead, you isolated yourself in your office. The truth of my words registered in his expression. I couldn't face them, he admitted quietly. After such a public failure, after they saw the security breach happen in real time during my presentation. Leadership isn't about being perfect, I said. It's about how you respond when things go wrong. For a moment, I glimpsed something in his eyes, a flicker of the thoughtful, passionate young man who had once dreamed of creating technology that would change the world, before status and social climbing had corrupted that vision. Then his expression closed again. We should get to the boardroom. They're waiting for us. As he turned to walk away, I called after him. Marcus. He paused but didn't turn around. Regardless of what happens in that meeting, I'm still your mother. That hasn't changed. His shoulders tensed, then relaxed slightly. Without responding, he continued down the hallway toward the confrontation that awaited us both. The boardroom was filled with tension when Marcus and I entered. 9 exhausted board members sat around the polished table, most clutching coffee cups as if they were lifelines. Thomas Weber occupied the chair at the head of the table, with 2 empty seats to his right, clearly reserved for me and Marcus. Elaine, Marcus, thank you for joining us, Thomas began as we took our seats. Before we start, I want to acknowledge the extraordinary work done overnight to address the security crisis. Elaine, the board has been briefed on your leadership of the recovery effort, and we're unanimously impressed with the results. Several board members nodded in agreement. Marcus sat rigidly beside me, his expression carefully neutral. However, Thomas continued, we're now faced with significant challenges on multiple fronts. The security breach has been contained, but the fallout is just beginning. We've received formal notifications from 6 beta clients indicating potential legal action. The stock dropped 42% in after-hours trading. 3 major news outlets have published stories about the breach, with more undoubtedly coming. Janet Keller, the venture capitalist who had been with Vertex since early funding rounds, leaned forward. We need to discuss leadership structure moving forward. Last night exposed serious governance issues that must be addressed if Vertex is to recover from this crisis. Marcus tensed beside me. I could sense the humiliation radiating from him as his leadership was questioned in my presence. I take full responsibility for the security failure, he said, his voice remarkably steady given the circumstances. The protocol changes should have gone through proper review. That oversight is on me. It's more than an oversight, Marcus, Michael Drayson countered. It's a fundamental breakdown in operational governance. The fact that your mother was able to identify and address the vulnerability so quickly suggests this was an entirely preventable crisis, if proper procedures had been followed. The criticism hung in the air, sharp and unavoidable. I resisted the maternal instinct to defend my son, recognizing that this reckoning was both necessary and long overdue. What matters now, Thomas interjected diplomatically, is how we move forward. The board has discussed various options and has come to a unanimous recommendation. All eyes turned to me, and I suddenly understood what was coming. We would like to formally reinstate Elaine as Chief Security Officer, with expanded oversight of all technical operations, Thomas stated. Additionally, we recommend establishing a dual leadership structure, with Marcus remaining as CEO focused on business development and client relationships, while Elaine manages technical operations and security governance. The proposal hung in the air between us. Effectively, the board was dividing the company leadership, creating a power-sharing arrangement that would force Marcus to cede significant control back to me. I watched my son's profile as he absorbed this recommendation. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he maintained his composure. And if I object? He asked quietly. Janet Keller responded without hesitation. Then the board would need to consider more dramatic leadership changes, Marcus. Last night's failure wasn't just technical. It was a failure of governance and oversight. We need to demonstrate to investors, clients, and the market that substantive changes have been implemented. The implication was clear. Accept shared leadership with his mother, or risk being removed entirely. Before Marcus could respond, I spoke up. I appreciate the board's confidence, but I'd like to propose an alternative arrangement. All eyes turned to me, including Marcus's, surprise evident in his expression. The security vulnerability has been addressed. I continued carefully. I've implemented safeguards to prevent similar issues in the future, including a mandatory 3-layer review process for all security-related changes. With these protocols in place, I don't believe my permanent return is necessary for Vertex's technical integrity. Thomas frowned. Elaine, with all due respect, your expertise was crucial last night. The team responded to your leadership in ways we haven't seen in months. I'm not suggesting I disappear entirely, I clarified. I propose serving as a security consultant and board advisor with authority to review major technical decisions but without direct operational control. This would provide the oversight needed while allowing the current leadership structure to remain intact. I deliberately avoided looking at Marcus, sensing his confusion at my unexpected support. Janet shook her head. After what happened, we need more than advisory oversight. We need someone with direct authority to prevent another disaster. What we need, I countered, is better governance structures, not specific personalities. The failure occurred because established protocols were bypassed. The solution is to strengthen those protocols and ensure they cannot be circumvented by anyone. I emphasized the last word, making it clear that even I would be subject to these safeguards. The board members exchanged glances, considering my proposal. Thomas studied me thoughtfully, perhaps recognizing my attempt to offer Marcus a path to redemption without public humiliation. Perhaps, Michael Drayson suggested, we could consider a transitional arrangement. Elaine returns as interim CSO for 3 months to implement the new governance structures, after which we reassess the leadership needs. This compromise seemed to find traction with several board members. Marcus remained silent beside me, his expression unreadable. Before we vote, Thomas said, I think we should hear from Marcus. This directly impacts his role and authority. Marcus, what are your thoughts on these proposals? All eyes turned to my son. The moment stretched as he gathered his thoughts, the weight of his precarious professional future evident in the slight tension around his eyes. First, he began, his voice steadier than I expected. I want to acknowledge that last night's failure was ultimately my responsibility. I approved the security changes without proper review because I was focused on meeting launch deadlines and improving the user experience. He paused, taking a breath. I also need to acknowledge that without my mother's intervention, Vertex might not have survived this crisis. Her technical expertise and leadership were invaluable. The admission clearly cost him, but he continued. That said, I believe Mr. Drayson's suggestion has merit. A transitional arrangement would allow us to implement proper governance while demonstrating stability to the market. He turned slightly toward me, meeting my eyes directly for the first time since the crisis began. If my mother is willing to return temporarily, I would welcome her expertise while we rebuild what was damaged last night. Not just the technology, but the processes that should have protected it. The simple acknowledgement, so different from the dismissive son who had excluded me from the launch gala, caught me off guard. For a moment, I glimpsed the collaborative relationship we'd once shared, before ambition and social climbing had created the gulf between us. I'm willing, I replied quietly. Thomas nodded, satisfied with this resolution. Then let's formalize the arrangement. Elaine will return as interim CSO for 3 months, with authority over all technical operations and security protocols. Marcus remains CEO, focusing on business relationships and market recovery. After 3 months, we'll reassess based on progress and stability. The vote was unanimous. As the meeting adjourned, board members filed out, many stopping to shake my hand or express relief at my return. Marcus remained seated, staring at the polished table surface as if searching for reflections of his former certainties. When we were finally alone, he spoke without looking up. You could have taken back complete control. The board would have supported you. That wouldn't have served the company, I replied. Or you. He finally raised his eyes to meet mine. Why are you helping me after I shut you out? The question contained the heart of all that had transpired between us. Not just the professional exclusion, but the personal rejection that had sent me to my solitary beach house while he celebrated with his new elite circle. Because, I said simply, I'm still your mother. That hasn't changed. The days following the security breach blurred together in a whirlwind of damage control, client meetings, and press statements. Marcus and I established an uneasy professional truce, carefully navigating our newly defined roles while rebuilding Vertex's shattered reputation piece by piece. I took control of the technical recovery, implementing the promised governance structures and personally meeting with the security teams of our most affected clients. Marcus focused on investor relations and public communications, displaying unexpected resilience as he faced the humbling task of acknowledging the company's failures while articulating our path forward. We operated in parallel, our interactions limited to necessary briefings and joint client presentations where we presented a united front. The personal gulf between us remained unaddressed, a conversation postponed by mutual unspoken agreement until the immediate crisis had passed. 2 weeks after the fateful launch gala, I arrived at the office early to find Marcus already at work in the conference room, surrounded by presentation materials for an upcoming investor meeting. He looked up as I passed, hesitated, then called out, "Mom, do you have a minute?" The simple question, so ordinary, yet laden with significance after our estrangement, stopped me in the doorway. "Of course," I replied, stepping into the room. "What do you need?" He gestured to the chair across from him. "Not what I need. Something I want to say." He waited until I was seated before continuing. "I've been preparing for tomorrow's investor presentation, reviewing our journey since the breach. The recovery metrics are impressive," I acknowledged. "The new security protocols have been well received by the technical community." "Yes," he agreed, "but that's not what I wanted to discuss." He pushed aside his laptop, meeting my gaze directly. "I've been thinking about what you said in the boardroom that day, about leadership being defined not by avoiding failures, but by how you respond to them." I nodded, remembering the conversation. "I failed," he continued, his voice steady despite the clear cost of this admission. "Not just with the security protocols, but with everything, with how I treated you, with the person I was becoming." The unexpected openness caught me off guard. For 2 weeks, we had maintained careful professional boundaries, focusing exclusively on Vertex's recovery while leaving our fractured relationship untouched. "Marcus, please," he interrupted gently. "Let me finish while I still have the courage." He took a deep breath. "Caroline called yesterday. She wants to reconnect, says she's had time to process everything, and believes in Vertex's recovery potential." And what did you tell her?" I asked carefully. A small, sad smile crossed his face. "I told her I'd call her back. Then I spent the entire evening thinking about why I was even considering it." He shook his head. "She abandoned me the moment things went wrong. So did her father, and their entire social circle, the people I'd been so desperate to impress that I excluded my own mother from the company's biggest moment." The raw honesty in his voice made my chest tighten. This was my son, not the polished, status-conscious CEO he'd been pretending to be, but the thoughtful, genuine person I'd raised. "The social validation you sought isn't entirely meaningless," I said gently. "We all want to belong, to be respected." "But at what cost?" he countered. "I compromised the company's security to impress Caroline's friend. I betrayed our founding principles for faster growth metrics that would attract her father's investment. I shut you out because you reminded me of where I came from, rather than where I thought I wanted to go." He pushed a folder across the table toward me. "I found these while gathering materials for the investor presentation. I thought you should see them." Inside were emails from the early days of Vertex, messages from our first clients praising the security architecture I had designed, thanking us for prioritizing data protection over flashy features. There were also notes from employees expressing gratitude for the collaborative culture we had built together, before Marcus had begun reshaping the company to impress his new social circle. "I'd forgotten," he said quietly, "what Vertex was supposed to be, what we had built together, before I convinced myself that I needed to build something different, something that would impress people who ultimately didn't care about me or the company's mission." I felt a complex wave of emotions, vindication mingled with maternal sorrow for my son's painful awakening. "Success can be disorienting," I offered. "It changes how people see you, and sometimes how you see yourself." "That's not an excuse," he said firmly. "Just a recognition of where things went wrong." He met my eyes directly. "I'm sorry, Mom, for excluding you from the launch, for gradually pushing you out of the company you helped create, for being ashamed of where we came from instead of proud of what you built, what we built together." The apology, so direct and unqualified, caught me by surprise. I had expected our reconciliation, if it came at all, to be gradual and halting, built on professional respect, rekindled through our forced collaboration. I hadn't anticipated this complete acknowledgement of all that had transpired between us. "I missed you," I admitted, my own defenses finally lowering. "Not just at Vertex, but in my life. These past 2 years, watching you drift away toward people who valued you for all the wrong reasons, it was like losing you by inches. I know, he said softly. I felt it happening, but I couldn't stop. The validation was intoxicating. Being accepted by Caroline, by her father, by that entire world I'd always seen from the outside, it became an addiction that overrode everything else, including my relationship with you. And now? I asked, not quite ready to fully trust this transformation. Now I'm facing reality, he replied. The people I was so desperate to impress disappeared the moment things went wrong. The principles I compromised nearly destroyed the company, and the person I pushed away was the only one who showed up to save everything without hesitation or judgment. He reached across the table, hesitantly extending his hand. I don't expect instant forgiveness. I just want a chance to rebuild what I damaged, both at Vertex and between us. I looked at my son's outstretched hand, remembering the little boy who had once held mine with complete trust as we navigated the early challenges of our lives together. The intervening years had changed us both, but perhaps not as fundamentally as I had feared. Rebuilding takes time, I said, placing my hand in his, and consistent effort. I know, he acknowledged. I'm prepared for that. A knock at the conference room door interrupted the moment. Sophie stood in the doorway, her expression shifting from businesslike to hesitant as she registered the scene before her. Sorry to interrupt, she said. The team is ready for the security protocol briefing whenever you are, Elaine. And Marcus, Thomas Weber is on line 1 about tomorrow's investor meeting. We'll be right there, I assured her. As she departed, I turned back to Marcus. Duty calls. He nodded, releasing my hand but maintaining eye contact. Would you maybe want to have dinner tonight? Just the two of us? There's more I'd like to talk about. The simple invitation, so ordinary between a mother and son, yet so significant after our estrangement, felt like the first real step toward healing. I'd like that, I replied. The Italian place on Charles Street? Like we used to do before board meetings in the early days? A genuine smile transformed his face, erasing the carefully cultivated sophistication he'd adopted and revealing the son I remembered. Perfect. 7 o'clock? I'll be there, I promised, rising from my chair. As we walked together toward our separate meetings, I felt a cautious hope begin to replace the ache that had become my constant companion. The breach that had nearly destroyed Vertex had also created an opportunity to repair something far more valuable than any company, the bond between mother and son. And this time, I wouldn't be watching from the shore as the sun set on what might have been. I would be present, engaged, and honest, ready to rebuild what had been broken, one conversation at a time. The restaurant hadn't changed in the years since we'd last dined there together. Salvatore's remained defiantly old school in a city obsessed with culinary trends. White tablecloths, soft lighting from brass sconces, waiters who remembered regular customers even after long absences. The owner, Giovanni, greeted me with his customary enthusiasm when I arrived a few minutes before 7. Signora Rossi, too long, he exclaimed, embracing me as if I were a long-lost relative. Your usual table is waiting. And Marcus is coming too? Just like the old days. Just like the old days, I echoed, though we both knew nothing was quite that simple. Giovanni led me to the corner table we had occupied countless times during Vertex's startup phase, the location where we'd celebrated our first major client, where we'd strategized during funding rounds, where we'd sometimes simply sat in exhausted silence after 18-hour workdays, too tired to speak, but drawing comfort from each other's presence. I had just settled in when Marcus arrived, looking slightly less polished than his recent corporate persona. He'd changed from his business suit into a simple button-down shirt and slacks, more reminiscent of the son I remembered than the image-conscious CEO he'd become. Sorry if I'm late, he said, sliding into his seat across from me. Call with the legal team ran long. Client issues? I asked, slipping easily into our old pattern of business discussions as a prelude to personal ones. Settlement negotiations with Boston Memorial. They're being reasonable, all things considered. He accepted the menu from Giovanni with a genuine smile of recognition. Still making that seafood risotto, Giovanni? For you, always, the restaurateur assured him, before disappearing toward the kitchen with an approving glance in my direction. A moment of awkward silence descended as we found ourselves alone, the professional buffer of Vertex business temporarily exhausted. I drove past our old apartment building yesterday, Marcus said suddenly. Remember that tiny two-bedroom where we lived when I was in high school? The one with the fire escape I used to sit on while studying? The unexpected reference to our shared past caught me by surprise. Of course, you claimed the city noise helped you concentrate, though I always suspected you were just watching the girls in the building across the alley. He laughed, the sound startlingly familiar, yet strange after so much estrangement. Busted. Though I did get my best calculus scores on tests I studied for out there, so maybe there was something to the urban soundtrack theory. What took you to that neighborhood? I asked, curious about this apparent nostalgia trip. He hesitated, turning his water glass slowly. Honestly, I was looking for something familiar after ending things with Caroline. Though he'd mentioned considering this during our conversation at the office, the confirmation that he'd actually broken things off surprised me. You called her back. Yesterday evening, he confirmed. It was clarifying. She spent 15 minutes explaining how her father might be willing to reconsider the investment if we made certain changes to the company leadership structure. Meaning me, I surmised, among other things. His expression hardened slightly. She hadn't asked how I was doing, or about the company's recovery efforts, or anything that wasn't directly related to her father's financial interests. It was like talking to a business negotiator, not someone who'd agreed to marry me a month ago. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it despite my reservations about their relationship. Pain was pain, regardless of whether the relationship had been healthy. He shook his head. Don't be. It needed to end. I just wish I'd recognized sooner what it was doing to me. To us. He met my eyes briefly before looking away. Anyway, after that conversation, I found myself driving around the old neighborhood, remembering what life was like before. He trailed off. Before success complicated everything, I finished for him. Before I complicated everything, he corrected. Success didn't change you. This simple observation, so obvious yet profound in its recognition, touched me deeply. For a moment, neither of us spoke, allowing the acknowledgement to settle between us. Giovanni's timely arrival with wine and appetizers provided a welcome interlude. As he fussed over the table, describing each dish with theatrical Italian flair, I observed my son's relaxed interaction with the restaurateur, a glimpse of the unpretentious person he'd been before status consciousness had overtaken him. After Giovanni departed, Marcus raised his wine glass slightly. To rebuilding, he offered, echoing my words from earlier. To rebuilding, I agreed, touching my glass to his. As we began to eat, the conversation flowed more naturally, moving between Vertex business and more personal topics. We discussed the company's recovery strategy, the promising feedback from clients about our new security protocols, and the gradually stabilizing stock price. Thomas thinks we'll recover most of our valuation within 6 months, Marcus noted, though he suggested we might want to postpone the next funding round until Q1 next year. A sensible precaution, I agreed. Better to approach investors from a position of demonstrated stability rather than rushed recovery. He nodded, then shifted topics unexpectedly. How's the beach house? I've been thinking about it a lot since the crisis. The last time I visited, I was so dismissive. The memory of his brief, uncomfortable visit to my coastal refuge surfaced. His thinly veiled disdain for the weathered shingles, the mismatched furniture, the general lack of sophistication that had once characterized our shared life, but had become unacceptable to his newfound standards. It's the same, I replied. Simple, quiet, overlooking the water. It suits me. I'd like to see it again, he said hesitantly. If that's okay. The request contained more than a simple desire to visit my home. It represented a willingness to reconnect with the unpretentious lifestyle he had recently rejected. I'd like that, I said, surprised by how much I meant it. Our main courses arrived, and as we ate, Marcus gradually broached the subject that had been implicitly present throughout our reunion. The board's 3-month review of our leadership arrangement is coming up soon, he noted. They'll be evaluating whether to make your position permanent or return to the previous structure. I set down my fork, recognizing the importance of this conversation. And what outcome are you hoping for? He considered the question carefully before answering. 2 months ago, I would have fought tooth and nail to maintain complete control, to prove I didn't need my mother's help running my company. A self-deprecating smile crossed his face. Amazing how a public security disaster changes one's perspective. And now? I prompted. Now I recognize that Vertex was always stronger with both of us involved. He met my gaze directly. The security protocols you've implemented, the governance structures, the renewed focus on our original mission, these aren't temporary band-aids. They're a return to what made Vertex special in the first place. He took a breath before continuing. I'd like to propose a formal co-leadership model to the board. You as CTO with authority over all technical operations, me as CEO focused on business development. Equal partners, like we were in the beginning. The proposal, so different from his previous determination to claim Vertex as solely his creation, caught me by surprise. Are you certain? Your identity has been so wrapped up in being the sole leader of Vertex. That's exactly the problem, he acknowledged. I've been defining myself by titles and recognition rather than the actual work and relationships that matter. He leaned forward slightly. I miss our partnership, Mom. The way we balanced each other. Your caution tempering my risk-taking. My market vision complementing your technical precision. The sincere admission touched something deep within me. The wound of professional rejection that had accompanied the personal distance between us. I'd need assurances, I said carefully. Formal governance structures that couldn't be bypassed, even by either of us. Clear boundaries and authorities. Absolutely, he agreed without hesitation. Everything in writing, board approved, with checks and balances that protect the company from any single person's misjudgment, including mine. His willingness to accept limitations on his authority, something he would have rejected outright before the crisis, was perhaps the most convincing evidence of genuine change. As we finished our meal and Giovanni brought espresso, our conversation shifted to more personal terrain, the possibility of regular Sunday dinners, his interest in seeing more of the simple life I'd embraced at the beach house, my cautious hope that our reconnection represented a sustainable shift rather than crisis-induced temporary reconciliation. When the check arrived, we both reached for it simultaneously, then laughed at the familiar gesture. Throughout Vertex's early years, we had maintained a good-natured competition over who would pay at our business dinners. Please, he said, his expression softening. Let me. Small step toward making amends. I allowed him this gesture, recognizing its importance, lay not in the financial transaction, but in the symbolic acknowledgement of all that had transpired between us. As we stepped outside into the cool evening air, Marcus hesitated before saying goodnight. Thank you, he said simply. Not just for dinner, but for being willing to start over after everything. Not starting over, I corrected gently. Building on what was always there, beneath the complications we added. He nodded, understanding the distinction. The beach house this weekend? I could drive up Saturday morning? I'll make blueberry pancakes, I promised. Your favorite. You remember, he said, a note of wonder in his voice. Marcus, I replied with a small smile. I've never forgotten anything important about you, even when you were trying to forget yourself. The Saturday morning dawned clear and crisp, a perfect early autumn day on the Massachusetts coast. I had risen with the sun, a habit formed during decades of early workdays that retirement and beach house living hadn't changed. After brewing coffee, I walked down to the shore, watching gulls wheel against the pale blue sky while mentally rehearsing the conversations that might unfold when Marcus arrived. Despite our dinner reconciliation and subsequent professional cooperation at Vertex, I maintained a cautious optimism. People in crisis often make sincere promises they struggle to keep when normalcy returns. Would Marcus's renewed appreciation for our relationship survive once the company stabilized? Would he again be drawn to the exclusive social circles that had contributed to our estrangement? These questions lingered as I collected a few shells along the waterline, tucking them into my pocket out of long habit. At precisely 10 o'clock, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Through the kitchen window, I watched Marcus emerge from his car. Not the sleek luxury sedan he typically drove, but an older model SUV I didn't recognize. More surprising was his appearance. Jeans, a simple sweater, and boat shoes that had actually seen boats. The carefully crafted executive image he'd maintained for the past 2 years was nowhere in evidence. He knocked lightly before entering, the slight hesitation in his movements revealing his uncertainty about where we stood outside the professional detente we'd established at Vertex. "Mom?" he called, stepping into the small front hall. "Something smells amazing." "In the kitchen," I replied, continuing to mix the promised blueberry pancake batter. "Coffee's fresh if you want some." He appeared in the doorway, taking in the simple kitchen with its worn countertops and mismatched crockery. Unlike his previous visit, when he'd barely concealed his disdain for what he'd called my rustic experiment, his expression now held something closer to nostalgia. "This reminds me of Grandma's place in New Hampshire," he observed, helping himself to coffee from the French press. "Remember how she refused to replace anything until it was completely unusable? That toaster that shot the bread across the room?" I smiled at the memory. She called it breakfast with excitement. "Your father used to wear a catcher's mitt at the breakfast table as a joke." The casual mention of Robert, who had died when Marcus was 12, didn't trigger the usual awkward silence. Instead, Marcus smiled, setting his coffee on the counter to help retrieve plates from the cabinet, a gesture of casual familiarity that suggested he was making himself at home rather than merely visiting. "I've been thinking a lot about Dad lately," he said, arranging plates on the small kitchen table that overlooked the water. "About what he would think of everything. Vertex, my choices these past few years, the security crisis." I poured the first pancake onto the griddle, considering my response carefully. Robert's memory had always been somewhat sacred between us, invoked sparingly and with reverence. "He would be extraordinarily proud of what you've built," I said honestly. Vertex represents exactly the kind of meaningful innovation he valued. He always said technology should serve human needs, not corporate ones. "And the rest?" Marcus pressed. "My gradual abandonment of our founding principles? The social climbing?" I turned from the stove to face him directly. "He would have been disappointed," I acknowledged. "Not in you, but in the choices. Your father never cared about status or appearances. He measured success by impact, not recognition." Marcus nodded, absorbing this without the defensiveness that would have characterized his reaction months earlier. "That's what I thought too," he said quietly. "I kept his picture in my office desk drawer, you know. Not displayed, just there. Sometimes I couldn't look at it after making decisions I knew he would question." The confession revealed a level of self-awareness I hadn't realized he'd maintained during his transformation into the status-conscious executive he'd become. Perhaps the son I knew had never completely disappeared, just gone underground while a different persona took center stage. As we settled at the table with steaming plates of pancakes, the conversation shifted to Vertex's future. Marcus outlined his vision for rebuilding the company's reputation through a return to our original mission, prioritizing security, ethical data management, and meaningful technological solutions over flashy growth metrics. "The board is fully supportive of our co-leadership proposal," he reported, reaching for the maple syrup. "Thomas says it's what he wanted all along but didn't think I'd accept before the crisis." "And now?" I asked, watching him carefully. "Now I understand what I was losing by pushing you away," he replied simply. "Not just your technical expertise, but your ethical compass, your ability to ask the hard questions I was avoiding in my rush for validation and growth." After breakfast, we walked along the beach, the conversation flowing more easily with each passing hour. Marcus spoke about his brief, enlightening final conversation with Caroline, how her transparent calculation about whether he remained a worthwhile investment had finally made him see their relationship clearly. I shared stories about my quiet life at the beach house, the local friends I'd made, the community I'd gradually become part of away from the high-pressure tech world. "You seem content here," he observed as we paused to watch a pair of ospreys circling over the water. "Happier than you were in the city." "Different kind of happiness," I corrected. I loved building Vertex, watching it grow, but there's something to be said for simplicity, for relationships based on who you are rather than what you've achieved. He nodded thoughtfully. "That's what I lost sight of, the distinction between being valued for what I could provide versus who I am." In the afternoon, we tackled a small repair project together, fixing the weathered deck railing that had begun to sag during recent storms. The physical work provided a comfortable backdrop for deeper conversations about the future, both personal and professional. As we measured and sawed replacement boards, Marcus broached the subject of the board's upcoming review of our leadership arrangement. "I've been thinking," he said, holding a board steady while I drilled pilot holes for the screws. "Even if the board makes our co-leadership permanent, the 3-month interim period you agreed to is almost up. Are you planning to stay on permanently?" The question revealed his lingering uncertainty about my commitment to Vertex and to our reconnection. "I'm considering it," I replied honestly. "The work is meaningful, and our partnership seems to be finding its balance again." But I've grown accustomed to this life too. I gestured toward the ocean view. The question is whether both are possible. They could be, he suggested, handing me a screw. 3 days at Vertex, 4 days here, or alternate weeks. We could make it work if it's what you want. The casual we struck me. The assumption that whatever solution emerged would be collaborative, a shared decision rather than a unilateral one. It represented precisely the shift I'd hoped to see. Let's see how the board review goes, I said, tightening the final screw. Then we can discuss the logistics. As evening approached, I expected Marcus to prepare for his return to the city. Instead, he surprised me by producing an overnight bag from his car. I thought maybe I could stay over, he said, a note of uncertainty in his voice. If that's okay? I brought work clothes for Monday, figured we could drive in together. The simple request contained multitudes, an expression of desire for extended time together, a symbolic return to the easy familiarity we'd once shared, a bridge between his corporate life and my coastal retreat. I'd like that, I replied, my voice steadier than the emotion behind it. The guest room needs fresh sheets, but otherwise it's all yours. Just like when I used to crash at your place during college breaks, he remarked, following me inside as darkness began to fall. Not quite, I corrected with a small smile. You're less likely to raid my refrigerator at 2 a.m. and leave the empty containers for me to find. He laughed, the sound ringing through the small house with a warmth that had been absent for too long. No promises on that front. Some habits die hard. As we moved around the kitchen preparing a simple dinner together, I realized that we were engaging in our own form of rebuilding, replacing the weathered, damaged connections between us with new structures, stronger perhaps for having recognized the vulnerability of what came before. Outside the windows, the last light faded from the sky, stars emerging in the clear autumn night. Unlike 2 weeks earlier, when I had watched the sunset alone while my phone vibrated with crisis calls, tonight I stood in a warm kitchen with my son, reconnected in ways I had feared might never happen again. The business crisis that had threatened to destroy Vertex had, paradoxically, created space for something essential to be saved. Not just a company, but a relationship that defined us both more fundamentally than any professional success ever could. 1 month later, I stood beside Marcus at the podium in Vertex's main conference room, facing employees, board members, and select media representatives. The occasion was significant. The official announcement of our permanent co-leadership structure following the board's unanimous approval. Today marks not just a new chapter for Vertex Technologies, Marcus was saying, his voice steady and confident, but a return to our foundational principles. The security crisis 2 months ago forced us to reevaluate everything, our technology, our processes, and most importantly, our values. I watched him as he spoke, noting the subtle differences between this Marcus and the image-conscious CEO who had excluded me from the launch gala. He was still polished and professional, but the desperate need for external validation had been replaced by something more authentic. Many of you know that Vertex began as a partnership, he continued. My mother and I built this company together, combining her technical expertise with my business vision. Somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that solo leadership was the path forward, that I needed to establish independence from our origins to achieve true success. He paused, meeting my eyes briefly before facing the audience again. I was wrong. The security crisis demonstrated what many of you already knew. Vertex is stronger with both of us at the helm, balancing each other's perspectives and holding each other accountable. The board members in the front row nodded approvingly. Thomas Weber caught my eye and gave a subtle thumbs up. He had been a staunch advocate for our co-leadership model during the review process, presenting data that showed marked improvement in both technical performance and team morale under our shared direction. When my turn came to speak, I kept my remarks focused on the future rather than the painful recent past. I outlined our renewed commitment to security governance, the enhanced review protocols for all code changes, and our philosophy of prioritizing data integrity over speed to market when necessary. Some might view recent events as a setback, I concluded. I see them as a course correction, a painful but necessary realignment with the values that make Vertex worth building and protecting. Together with Marcus and all of you, I'm committed to moving forward with both innovation and integrity at the core of everything we do. The announcement was followed by a modest reception in the main atrium. Nothing like the lavish gala that had ended so disastrously, but a meaningful celebration nonetheless. As employees and board members mingled, many approached to express their appreciation for my return and the stability it had brought to the company. "The team is different with you here," Sophie observed, joining me by the windows overlooking the Boston skyline. "More focused, more confident. It's like everyone can breathe again." "They just needed reassurance that the foundation was solid," I replied. The security breach shook everyone's confidence. "It's more than that," she insisted. "Marcus is different too, more like his old self, the person he was before." She trailed off diplomatically. "Before Caroline and her social circle," I finished for her. "Yes, I've noticed the change." Across the room, Marcus was engaged in conversation with Alan Chen and several security team members, listening intently to their input rather than dominating the discussion. The subtle shift in his interaction style, from performing authority to practicing genuine leadership, was evident to anyone who had known him before his transformation. "Speaking of changes," Sophie said, lowering her voice slightly, "have you heard about Edward Bennett? Caroline's father? Not recently. The SEC announced an investigation into the Westfield Group's accounting practices yesterday," she informed me, with barely concealed satisfaction. "Apparently, there are significant discrepancies in their reported earnings for the past 3 quarters. The news explained the cryptic text Marcus had sent me earlier. "Dodged a bullet. Tell you later." The Westfield investment he had once desperately courted would have tied Vertex to a potentially scandalous financial investigation. "Sometimes rejection is protection," I murmured, watching my son across the room. The son who had found his way back to himself after nearly losing everything that truly mattered. After the reception, as employees returned to work and board members departed, Marcus joined me in my office, the space that had once been relegated to storage but now served as my official headquarters within Vertex. "Well, that's official," he said, loosening his tie as he settled into the chair across from my desk. "No backing out now. You're stuck with me as a partner again." "I think I can manage," I replied with a smile. "Though we should discuss the beach house arrangement more specifically now that this is permanent. Over the past month, we had established a tentative pattern. 4 days in Boston focused on Vertex, 3 days at the beach house where work was limited to urgent matters only. The rhythm had served us well during the transition, allowing professional reintegration alongside personal reconnection." "Actually, I've been thinking about that," Marcus said, leaning forward slightly. "What if we established a small satellite office near Rockport? Nothing elaborate, just enough secure infrastructure to allow remote work for both of us when needed. We could alternate our schedules, ensuring one of us is always physically present at headquarters while maintaining the beach house connection." The suggestion revealed how seriously he had considered our shared future, not just as business partners but as mother and son, rebuilding a relationship that transcended professional collaboration. "That could work," I agreed, touched by his thoughtfulness. "Though the whole point of the beach house was to escape technology occasionally." "Balance," he acknowledged with a nod. "We'll establish strict boundaries. No satellite office work after 6 p.m. or on Sundays. The beach remains sacred territory." We continued refining the idea, the conversation flowing easily between professional planning and personal considerations. The wall that had once separated these aspects of our lives had gradually dissolved, allowing a more integrated relationship to emerge from the rubble of our estrangement. As evening approached, we prepared to leave together, another new habit, sharing the drive home at least twice a week, regardless of which home we were heading to. "Dinner?" Marcus suggested as we walked to the parking garage. "Salvatore's? Giovanni's been asking when we're coming back." "Perfect," I agreed, remembering our reconciliation dinner a month earlier, the first tentative step toward rebuilding what had been broken. In the car, as city lights began to illuminate the early winter darkness, Marcus spoke quietly. "You know what I was thinking about during the announcement today?" "What's that?" "The moment you arrived at Vertex the night of the security breach, everyone was panicking. Investors were fleeing, and I was hiding in my office wondering how everything had fallen apart so completely." He glanced at me briefly before returning his attention to the road. "And then you walked in, completely calm, and started solving problems one by one. No recriminations, no, 'I told you so,' just solutions. That's what mothers do," I replied simply. He shook his head slightly. "It's more than that. You had every right to be angry, to let me face the consequences of excluding you. Instead, you showed up and saved everything I was about to lose. Not just the company, but eventually me too. The simple acknowledgement moved me deeply. You weren't lost, Marcus, just temporarily misplaced. He laughed at that, the sound filling the car with warmth. Misplaced is one way to put it. Seduced by all the wrong priorities is another. As we pulled up to Salvatore's, I noticed his expression grow more serious. What is it? I asked, recognizing the look he'd worn since childhood when wrestling with a significant thought. I just want you to know, he said, turning to face me fully, that I understand now what you've always tried to teach me. Success isn't about impressing people or gaining social status. It's about building something meaningful and surrounding yourself with people who value you for who you are, not what you can give them. A lesson worth learning, even the hard way, I acknowledged. The hardest part, he admitted, was realizing how close I came to losing the most important relationship in my life because I was chasing approval from people who didn't actually care about me. But you didn't lose it, I reminded him gently. Here we are, he echoed, a smile replacing the seriousness. Partners again, in every way that matters. Inside the restaurant, Giovanni greeted us with his customary enthusiasm, leading us to our table in the corner. As we settled in, surrounded by the familiar warmth of a place that held so many memories for us both, I reflected on the journey of the past 2 months. The security breach that had threatened to destroy Vertex had ultimately revealed something far more valuable than any technology, the enduring strength of bonds that could bend under pressure, but, with care and commitment, need not break completely. My son had decided I wasn't worthy of his new elite circle. He had told me not to come to the company party for the business I helped him build. And for the first time, I hadn't argued. I had simply left for the coast, giving him space to discover what truly mattered on his own terms. Sometimes I realized as we clinked glasses in a silent toast to our reconciliation, the most powerful response to rejection isn't argument or retaliation, but simply the patience to be present when the inevitable fall comes, ready to help rebuild something stronger than what was lost. In the end, it wasn't about worthiness at all. It was about authenticity, integrity, and the courage to choose meaningful connection over empty validation, a lesson worth every painful step of our journey back to each other.